Okay, this is the tribute to Carolyn Cassady. Cassady, as she used to say it lovingly. This is Carolyn Cassady. And at all the tributizers and memorializers and family and friends and various spiritual, literary, painting, theater offspring gathered on the 1-year anniversary of her passing, September 20th, 2013. The angel ascended back to the heavens, from whence she came. The love of Neil Cassady's life throughout his, and in my considered opinion, Jack Kerouac's as well. If you read the letters between the two of them, and they pledged to be together in the next life. And he wrote about that. I mentioned that in Big Sur, actually. And that was a book that we actually all read together at Northport, where he wrote it for the 40th anniversary of him writing Big Sur. And that was a typical whole adventure where we, it's this craziest reading in a police station, courthouse in Northport. First time we ever had a gig in a cop shop. And, but it's actually like in the courtroom. And so we're sitting like at the defendant's tables and reading from the judge's stand. So that was a whole hoot. And then they wanted to go out for lunch, and I was like, oh man, you know, looking at my watch, being the guy who's sort of like taking care of stuff. We come walking back, and just as we, come walking back up to the cop shop courthouse, there's the producers outside walking up and pacing back and forth on the sidewalk like, where are the Cassadys and Hassett? What have they done? Oh no, they're about to go on. And we come waltzing back in right when it happens. And that was the time when Carolyn goes, well, Brian gets things done. Getting us back just in time. And that was this phrase that she used all the time for me, because we would take all of these, like we traveled together in Northport and New York and San Francisco and Amsterdam and Boulder and all these different places. In England, we had tons of fun. And I was always kind of the guy, we're in Amsterdam, we're going to the Rijksmuseum, we're going to Rembrandt's house. So I got, and Carolyn, this great painter, I got to take her to the Rijksmuseum and see all of these Van Goghs and Rembrandts and the masters, and then go to Rembrandt's actual house where he lived for 20 years, and then with his paintbrushes and his books and the way Rembrandt lived. And she was just like a kid in a candy store, just soaking in master portrait artist's world, which she was so good at. And I was like, I had scouted the red light district and knew it was a hoot, and wanted, had to get Carolyn to go to this thing, because, this would be so funny to have her in the red light district. And just as adamant as I was about her getting her there, she was adamant that she was not going to go. So one night we're out, I don't know whether I arranged for us to go to this restaurant or by fluke. It was just outside of the red light district, but I knew it was there. And the red light district is this crazy thing where, at least along that side, was this whole sort of wall. And unless you went through this one doorway, you'd never know what was on the other side of that wall. So we're walking them along, and I'm like, oh, I think this is a shortcut. And cut them in there, and then boom, you're in this world where like every storefront has these like red neon lights going around the outside of the window, and some girl sitting there in lingerie and trying to entice menfolk, I reckon, in for a visit. And and they're all sort of like modeling, like however they do it, trying to get people in. And but it was just a hoot. Now she's there, and we're like well buzzed after dinner, and so she starts giving like the set designer and costume designer of her past comes to life, and she's giving like running commentary on all of the little storefront facades that each of the girls have created for their own little world, and how those could be better, and the costumes. And so we got to do a whole trip through the red light district, and it was just a hoot. The three of us were just laughing our heads off, with Carolyn giving the running commentary. And and then when that was another one of these, like, after we got out of there, and she said she didn't want to go, but she loved it. And she's like, well, Brian gets things done. So that was kind of a core principle of our friendship over the years, was that, I would get her to do stuff that maybe she wasn't going to regularly do, but she'd love it when it got done. So we did all of those things. And then the weirdest part about the whole get things done part was there was this movie, Magic Trip, that was finally came out in 2011, I think, and it had the original footage of the '64 bus trip, and none of us had seen a lot of it. And so I saw it at TIFF, actually, where I just saw Kill Your Darlings a year ago, and On the Road world premiere the year before that, and the year before that was Magic Trip. In the movie, they've got footage of Neil driving the bus, and at some point one of the pranksters has taped up a piece of paper on the windshield that says, "Neil gets things done." And I just about died when I saw that, but couldn't believe it, but only saw it this one time at the TIFF festival, right? So I didn't, on the big screen, it went by like that. Did I really see that? So I get to Carolyn's in England. Oh yeah, so how that happens was, my mom had died the year before, and and I went to New Orleans Jazz Fest in the spring, and it was so great. I called Carolyn up, thinking I was going to go to Glastonbury, come out and see her and go to Glastonbury. But it was off that year. It was their 1 year of a sabbatical they take quite frequently. So I phoned her anyway, and she didn't get all that many phone calls, especially not all that many from across the pond. And so I'd call every 4 or 6 months or whatever, just check in, and we'd have a whole long chat. And so I was doing it this time, and she goes, I said, "Oh, I'll come and see you next year for Glastonbury." She said, "Oh, honey, I don't think I'll be here next year." And I was like, whoa, what? And so her kids are all having trouble getting over there at that time. And so I don't know whether or she suggested it and said, I could come over there and see you now. And she was like, "Oh, honey, if you would do that, it would be the greatest thing." So I went over there, ended up living with her for 3 months in this cabin in the woods, the forest around Windsor Castle, the protected King's Forest, where Henry VIII did his hunting, and they've got real live redwood sequoias. Oh, yeah. So anyway, so I'm in Carolyn's house, but it's like a cabin in the woods, and she's really into movies, and and she gets these magazines and goes through and orders all these classic movies. It's sort of her last pleasure in life, or guilty pleasure type of thing, ordering these movies, right, from magazines and books that come. Then they just come through her mail slot in the morning, and she knows the mailman, and they have a great time together. So she's so she's got this stash of movies. It's unbelievable. And but right under the TV, she had the Beat movies and everything related to them. And it was like 3 layers thick on 2 different shelves. There had to be 100 different movies and documentaries on there. And so we find Magic Trip and watch that, and stick it in, and get to the part where it says this, and hit pause, and it's like, that's what it says. And she's, sort of stunned silence in the room for a minute, and then she goes, "Well, you inherited it." So that was this great moment with Carolyn passing on. Like, how does "gets things done" become her phrase to me, which she used with nobody else ever? It wasn't part of her vernacular. And then there's the pranksters have written the exact same thing about Neil on the front of the bus. So that's, you know, the arc of that whole Gets Things Done story ends sitting in her house watching her husband's be bestowed with the same moniker. So there was some of that fun stuff, but on a larger level there was all these things that I learned from Carolyn, one of which was to be involved with the world always. She had a routine during the day which was great, which was she would read her books and do her emails during the day. And the emails she would get from sort of fans or the curious all over the world would write her. And sometimes, a lot of times it was just, hey, read your book and it was great and so on. Which reminds me, at that Northport thing, we had this whole crazy thing where we were sitting on the, like there was no green room, right? So I boosted a couple of chairs out from inside the venue and put them out on the front stoop because she liked to have a ciggy, as she said. And so we created this sort of green room there. And then we had to, and then, oh, bottle of wine, yes. So, and then we ended up drinking a bottle of, she had a bottle of wine, I had my regular cold Heinekens, and we're having this full-on party on the steps of the courthouse in Northport. So that was a whole funny thing. But why was I telling you that? Because people would come up to her, and it was kind of always the same thing, which was, you know, I read On the Road when I was X years old, and it changed my life. And, you know, the moderate to Off the Road, or you know, whatever way that these people became in contact with Carolyn and the beats, and it changed their life. So she would get these emails, but, you know, also, more often than not, they would also be asking her for motherly advice. And so she was this, you know, she was not only sort of the mother figure to the Beats, and created the only home the Beats ever knew, a stable home with a yard and an ongoing house and kids and a husband and a car, and they both had jobs, and it was a functioning normal home that Jack always aspired to and Alan always aspired to, and could, you know, she was the one who was actually creating it, because God knows Neil wouldn't have pulled it off without her. So, and so all these other people, these fans, these kids, and they weren't necessarily kids, would write her for advice on, you know, marriage, boyfriends, girlfriends, jobs, life choices, creative endeavors. And she would painstakingly and lovingly respond to all of these people all over the world for years. She did it for ever since the email came along. Would write these people back and kind of be this counselor mother figure to countless hundreds or thousands around the world. So she would do that during the day, and then 5 o'clock was when the evening news came on, and that was also the okay time that she could have a glass of white wine. So, but she remained diligently involved in the world until her last week. And she went quickly, which was a God blessing for her. But she was living her life and watching the news and, you know, having her ciggies and her white wine, you know, less up to 5 or 6 days before she passed. So, you know, may we all be so lucky. And so at 5 o'clock was her, but this was when she was engaged in the world, man, and she would watch, there was 2 newses on it from 5 to 5:30 and 5:30 to 6, and then there was like more nationally news. So we'd end up watching news for about 2 hours every day. And she would comment on them and have these, you know, this running commentary and opinions on everything that was happening around the world. And that was another thing I loved about her, which a lot of people's opinions are just parroted from someplace else. But she was really somebody who had her own and could back them up. And that was a great thing. And even if I didn't always agree with them, she had, you know, we could discuss them for hours on end. Yeah, so then after the movies would end, or the news, I mean, you know, we might go through and go through the movie stash, or else she will have painstakingly checked what was on the schedule, the TV schedule for the evening. But when we were watching movies, this funny thing would happen where, you know, we could hit pause, right? So we hit pause, and I could ask her a question, or she'd want to tell a story, and this could go on for a half an hour, and then we'd hit play again, and then, oh wait, there's one other thing I had to tell you, and then pause, and then it would take us like 9 hours to get through one movie, because we keep yakking on and systematically going through all of the I'd be pulling out the beat movies to watch, and she'd be pulling out these classics, often British made film classics that she thought I had to see. So we sort of traded off on this like movie club for 3 months that I lived there. Look, it's this Kerouac Festival Cup. How funny. 19, oh, you won't be able to see it, but whatever this was, 2003. Huh, funny. So those were some of the watching movie stories, but also the important thing about her being involved in the world, and that's, you know, until the day she died, and and the quiz shows, that was another thing that would come on at night, and she would, you know, clean my clock in those things. Because she was just a living encyclopedia. But another lesson was multidisciplinary and working all the time. Like, she never just kicked back and, you know, did nothing. You know, first she began as a set designer and a costume designer and a painter, portraitist in her teens. And did that for decades and decades afterwards, and then wrote Off the Road, and also wrote an uncanny number of introductions. I found these in the books in her house, all these introductions to other people's books she wrote besides that. So the point was always working, always in the multidisciplinary, so you don't have to be stuck in one thing your whole life, but always be working and always be doing it as good as you can, whatever it is you're doing. So that was another key lesson. But the books around her house, that was another whole trip. She had thousands of them, and I love, you know, people with books, obviously. And as soon as you walked in the front door, it was a bookshelf from the front door all the way to the hallway. And then from the hallway, and there's this one hallway that went all the way down the house, and it was pretty narrow, but still it had a bookshelf from one end to the other. And then the living room was all books, and then all around her bedroom. And they were all separated into sections like history, theater, poetry, classics, beats, spirituality, travel, because she was a big traveler, and all of those sections totally reflected who she was. Like what I just rattled off there could be a portrait of Carolyn, her history, her classics, her theater, her beats, her spirituality, her travel. Those were the things that all coalesced to make her who she was. And so it was this beautiful book-filled library, shrine, church, that's the word I'm looking for, that she lived in every day. And there was this discipline about her that I loved, which was, and we could correct each other, you know, when we were riffing. If somebody had something wrong, like pronounced a word wrong or something, and she would correct me on it, but in a loving way, to, you know, honey, that's not the way you say that word, or something. And we were always looking stuff up on the computer, which was, you know, so like kind of fact checking, and like, you know, talk, look up, talk, look up, talk. So, but she wanted to have the facts, and that was just another thing that I loved about hanging out with her, which I think is connected to what Jack and Neil probably loved about hanging out with her. This vast knowledge, right? And then just some other kind of funny, cool things were that, you know, she was the first person to move to San Francisco. pre-everybody. And it was Neil who followed her, and then Jack who followed, and then Alan after that, and Furling completely independent sometime after that. But it was her that was the first one of any of these people that went to that city. And, you know, what if she had stayed in Denver, or had gone to L.A. and stayed down there when she was looking for a theater film type job? You know, how different history would be had the Beats not planted the flagpole in San Francisco, but rather had done it in L.A. The entire Beat history would be very different. Like, would there ever have been the connection between the Beats and City Lights had Carolyn not been the one that first got Alan to follow Neil and her there, right? So, and another thing I loved about, you know, that was extant in the present that would have been all through her colorful life history was her giggle. She didn't just really have a laugh. She had more like a little girl's giggle. And she just kind of giggled. I don't know, I can't do it. I'm not an impersonator. But it was so cute, and it was so funny, and it was not a big guffawing ha-ha. It was this like little girl's giggle that she would kind of revert to when she got to that point. And it was so cute and funny. And it had to be the exact same laugh that she had since she was a kid. The same giggling, silly, joyous, love-filled giggle laugh that Neil would have fallen in love with, and Jack. And so since I love to hear it so much, it was like a kind of a reward system for this Pavlov's dog that, you know, if I could say something funny enough and get her laughing, I could get the reward of hearing that giggle. And so I did that as much as I possibly could. So that's a whole bunch of stuff about Carolyn. And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson, your maiden name. Heaven holds a place for those who pray. Thank you, Paul Simon, who I saw in Hyde Park when I was visiting Carolyn. And praying, that's another thing she did. She prayed every night. Hard to believe. You think that this, you know, kind of crazy beatnik person, but she was not a crazy beatnik person. She was a very, say, normal and grounded person who knew the foundations of life and continued to practice those eternal verities for 90 years. And it served her well. And she changed so many people's lives. And today some of them are gathered in the cafe in San Jose, but they are all over the world. Still living in the spirit light that she shone on so many of us. And this is me thanking you, Carolyn, up there in the big cafe in the sky. No, you're going to be at a bar, honey, I know it. So I'll see you there in no time, and we'll pick up our conversations then. It was a blast sharing this plane with you, and I look forward to the next one. And so thanks for everything, my dear, and you changed my life, and you changed thousands of others, and we're all thinking of you this day.